Hey everyone, back at it again for another Ag Uncensored podcast, and maybe I just call it podcast in the pickup. Of course, I have my dog walk, which I'm currently doing right now. Uh, Anyways, I like this feature, and now it's summer, so spring is here. Summer is upon us, depending on how you want to look at it, where you're at. But a lot of activity going on. Um, there's all sorts of crazy crap in agriculture as always, and even on the as I always talk in the ag tech space, there's there's just a lot of shifting going on as everyone's been talking about. I don't really want to dive into that because I mean the reality is it's summer, it's kind of a lull time because the last thing on farmers and agronomists and ag retailers mind is like wanting to understand how software and sensors and all this stuff works. If anything, they just want it to work right now. So support is probably a bigger deal right now. So if you are in that space, you know, if you don't know, well, this time, especially in most parts of the world, springtime, it's a little different in the southern hemisphere. Is Right now is the time that shit has to work. If it doesn't, you might have ruined your opportunity for life for some people. Um, as I've talked about before, you can have the best tool, sensor, product that you think of, whatever, it doesn't really matter. If it doesn't work at the time that it's supposed to work, especially electronics of some form or fashion, some digital thing, oh, like you get one chance a year to make it work. It's got to work. So that's step one in this time of year. If you're trying to build anything, it just has to work when it's supposed to work to showcase its value. I shouldn't have to tell anyone that. I think it's pretty apparent with anything, clearly. Uh, but the difference in ag is we're a bunch of stubborn assholes half the time. So it's one thing if someone like me doesn't understands why it doesn't work in the moment. I've been in plenty of video conferences showcasing software and what it can do, and something breaks and it doesn't work. Well, usually on the other end, it's been, I'm usually talking to some, a bigger business and their digital people on their side or their programmers, and they get it because they're sometimes dealing with the same crap. They're like, yeah, no, we get it. It's fine. You do that with a farmer and agronomist that's actually using that tool in the field, you're gonna have a worse time, especially if you're in season, which is now and then, for the next 3 4 months. It has to work. Of course, with that said, I want to kind of highlight a post I made last week around data resolution, and it all plays within all this stuff that I'm talking about so far. Is that what I was talking about? Is the resolution of data is actually only as good as the machine that applies it or what you can actually make a change on. So, i.e., if my machine is 100 feet wide, say a sprayer, 60 feet wide, a planter, or an air drill, or whatever, that if that's the length of what I can apply it to and varying the rates, that's my resolution. That's the best I can do. So 1 meter, half meter, 10 centimeter, plant by plant picture or sensor or something from some ag tech hardware, software, sensor, data device, system, product, solution, whatever, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that it's that good. Now, it's not to say having a better resolution, kind of raw data set doesn't help in refining it a little better and massaging the data so that when it is de-resolutionized to the machine, that it fits better. Some anomalies are known better or whatnot. Yes, that can be the case. From my experience in the satellite imagery world, you know, for years all I had was Landsat 30-meter resolution. And people would be like, "Well, I want this. I want it from a plane, or I want it from this." I'm like, and I always had to say this is like, "Well, how wide is your whatever spray boom?" And they're like, "Well, it's 90 feet." I was like, "Oh, hey, that matches pretty good. 30-meter resolution, 90 feet. Yeah, it's pretty close. Yeah, you're good. You can't really get much better." And then they'd kind of back off. They're like, "Oh, I never thought about that way." Drones came in, and then we were working with some higher satellite resolution, that 5-10 meter space, and then that argument would come up. It's the same thing. It's like, yeah, well, that's great, but you paid how much to get that aerial stuff? 10-15 bucks an acre. Hey, good data, not harming that. If you're doing it just to create a variable rate map, well, you still have the same problem. And people had to step back from that, like, oh. And then you'd see like the prescription maps and be like, well, look what we can do. It's like, and I was like, I'd find the field and the exact same date, relative to when that shot was. And I was like, here. I was like, that's like unlimited for a set price. Or, it's pennies an acre, 10 cents an acre. I mean, it's just way cheaper. And you get the same result. Super common reality. But no, of course, the argument kind of flips. It's like, well, no, we have, booms that can do nozzle by nozzle and, row by row on planters. And, there's section variable rate on certain air seeders and stuff like that. Like, great. Okay. That's cool. It's like, well, so now we can use that precision to that nth degree. I'm like, well, can you though? Because then that's the other part of what I was saying is, can you actually make the change to that area? Much of what happens with a plant growing, you're looking above it for the most part. That's the essence of remote sensing and, other sensor data. It's looking on top. Well, that's just showing really a response from how that plant is interacting with the soil and the moisture in the soil and its properties. Um, all of that together, the different types of soil properties, compaction, you name it. There's organic matter, how much, nutrients are in the soil. A sensor on the surface can't really see that well. Many attempts make to model that. If someone says we can read exactly how much NPK is in your soil from space, well, they're pulling you smoke. Sorry, you can disagree with me all you want. There is not a great way to do that. Can you see the response of what a plant is responding to some degree? Yeah, to some degree. But it is not as good as, say, a very fine-tuned soil test to a specific area of the field. Whether it's a zone grid, yeah, sure, it's better than composite sample across the field, I suppose, kind of. Anyways, that's a different argument. So say you're on a 160 acre field, one right next to me, and if I go row by row, and there's a little different change there, oh well, what is it responding to? Is it responding to a little extra darkness in the soil or something? Some have these, row by row pH sensors and all that. Well, pH is great. That doesn't tell the whole story. Organic matter is great. That doesn't tell the whole story. Nothing tells the whole story. And so deciding everything based on just a sensor in the moment in the individual row, well, at times that can work to a degree. Don't get me wrong, but you got to be really careful because there's other things that are affecting the changes in that area. And if you're just assuming it's from one reading from a certain sensor or even two readings, you can actually mess the thing up even more. You can mess your field dynamics up more. And then if you're changing those rates in odd ways, and then you're trying to remote sense that from some imagery tool or some other thing, some of the new abilities on sprayers and all that, like the sensor pointing forward, which some of that's been around for a long time, but that will skew that data. And then will that actually apply it correctly? As, can you actually make a good enough change in difference that's actually applicable to that specific little point, that little tiny point where that sensor read it at that tiny resolution without a full agronomic understanding of it, like a veteran agronomist would have on that area? It's kind of this, you got to use more of a law of averages, like, well, this zone for the most part is this way, so we should treat it for the most part this way. Spot treatment in ag is very tough, and like, how do you even understand if you got the ROI out of it? It might have made you feel good. Oh, I'm reading this down the field and it says it on my monitor, and if it's X this, I reduce to this, and that makes you feel good. That's a lot of what this stuff is almost sold as, is like a feel good solution. When in reality, the real way to apply differences using data in a field, you really want to understand the response you get from it. And it's very hard to do. And sometimes you got to kind of dumb it down. You got to make it a little simpler. It's not about making every tiny little minute change. Like, we really aren't good at that at scale. Maybe in a plot environment, but I would say even in plot environments, that's still tough. You're talking, individual plants, individual areas. Just general soil testing is problematic in its own right, because, and plenty of people have done this. They've taken soil samples right next to each other, like within a foot, maybe even closer, and they've sent it to different labs around the country, and all the results are different because everyone handles it a little differently. There's different mantras to it. And it's like, okay, is that the actual way to go about it? Maybe not, because there's so much difference. Maybe there's some newer ways to go about it. I will call out in favor of my friends at Landscan. They're looking at the soil structure as it's going down, and more trying to understand that, not necessarily grabbing a direct reading. They're more looking at the soil properties in that area to try to understand how a plant would respond in that area, instead of, oh, it just has this much nitrogen, this much potassium, this much phosphorus, XYZ other nutrients. It's more about how it could handle it with how the soil structure is presented and what's actually there, because there's so much going on under there that we don't know. So if it's just a sensor on the surface saying, hey, it should be this, well, it's not always just that. As I've told people for years and years, decades, anything remotely sensed, it's hard for it to give an exact answer. You have a lot of history and understanding of your field. You have a lot of history and understanding of the dynamics, and a lot of it. Can you make an educated guess? Yes, with just a singular layer, say like an image or a yield monitor or something like that. Yes, you can make a decent educated guess. Oh, this is my low area, this is my average area, this is my high area. Okay, that it's always that way. It's basically a mix of different soil properties, elevation, and that's about it. Those factors play in it, and it showcases that year after year. I'm gonna make a good base map. But so many are pushing like, oh, we need to change it every single thing every single year, and then you almost you might mess it up and screw up your base map because you're skewing the future results of what you're actually going to sense. And you might think that little gadget changing it in that area is great because, I can do it row by row or bit by bit. And that stuff can work well for like on and off applications. See and spray is a great example of that. But plenty are getting into, changing on the go. Well, we just don't know everything or can know everything on the go. And, while you can take a forward picture sensor of an infrared looking at the plants, Green Seeker's been around for years, and John Deere and others and CNH and others are coming out with, their forward sensors like, oh, we can sense these things and change it as we go. You gotta be freaking careful on that because I can tell you firsthand that does not always work. Just because that area is greener doesn't mean it means X, or if it's less green means X, or if it's whatever. Most of the remote sense data is a guide to where you need to go to see a difference and try to understand it. How you understand it, either you have to have the right tools in place, you have to do some, intense scouting, soil testing, XYZ, use some other sensors that can tell some other things about it. Maybe there's other remote sense data you can do and go about it. And it's hard. There's nothing simple about it, but you can make it simple to a point if you as the user of that data are pretty much very well educated on the field and the area as a farmer or a veteran agronomist on that field. You can make simpler work a lot better. If you're pulling this stuff out of the box and it's your first time doing it, you got to use a lot more sensors and processes and to really understand it. So if you're picking up a new piece of ground, for instance, if someone's doing that, yeah, you might have to spend a lot more money right away to really understand it if that's what you're trying to do. Otherwise, you just have to wait and spend a lot more time. This is where some of the problems with ag tech has occurred is so much is being thrown at you. This sensor, this part, this thing, it can do this. Oh, if we just take this high resolution thing of this, a couple times over the field, we'll give you all these perfect answers. Okay, well, can you actually apply it to make that change happen? Is that change good enough? Does that ROI, can you actually prove that you making that tiny minute change actually did something positive? And most of the time you really can't. It's more of a gut feeling like, I think it worked. That's usually what happens. Someone will spend, umpteen amount of dollars on something, and then they'll make a change like, well, I think it worked. But unless you have like all the other data to prove it, or that instinct of understanding how that field, evolves, then you're just kind of throwing your hands up in the air and guessing that, well, I think it works, so maybe I'll try it again. But then you get that what farmers have in that situation, they get kind of nervous, like, I don't really see it. But then half the time, most of the time, they don't do the extra work to actually figure out if the ROI was there. They won't dig into the yield data or do different trial and plot work. I'm not saying some don't. Plenty do, but most do not do this. It's the 80-20 rule, and it's worse than that. It's like a 95-5% rule. 5% will get in there and do some of that intensity to figure out what works and what doesn't, or they work with someone that can help them with that. 5% follow that 5% and kind of do it, but not great. And then another 10% kind of just dabble and try to follow in the footsteps of the other top 10%. But they're not quite there. They are and aren't. And then 80%, I'm like, I just want to get the damn shit in the field and let it grow. I got insurance. I have everything properly set up. I think I put the right varieties out there. I'm good enough. You know? So is Is ag tech too much for a lot of people? Yeah. Is it not enough for plenty of people? Yeah. What's the balance? Um, it really depends on the person and the situation and the type of field. There is no universal way to do it. So, just some words and thoughts to think about for this week. Uh, and that's it for now. So take care of your resolutions and don't overdo it because it can turn out wrong. And think through the process a little more because it's not as simple as I put this sensor in a field and it solves my problems. There we go. We'll see you later.